So, hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to Debra and Peter are doing a podcast with the Chief Executive of the DSC, Deborah Alcott-Tyler, and me, Peter Wallace. How have you been, Deborah, in my absence?
I've been all right, actually. I'm very happy to say to listeners who are interested in the progress of my beloved Basset Arthur is that having had all sorts of post-op complications and everything being dragged out, he has now been released, discharged from all the vets, from our family vet, from the hospital, from the dog-spital, as we've been calling it. He doesn't have to wear his collar anymore. And he's pain-free. So he's bouncing about as if he's like gone back to being a puppy, you know, which is, on the one hand, really great, because obviously he's not in pain. On the other hand, oh, dear God in heaven, he's got to deal with an enthusiastic dog now who's happy about life again. So, but yeah, so those of you who are interested, you know, and I'll make sure I post a pic of a happier dog.
Oh, that's brilliant. And we've got some wildlife developments here as well. We have acquired 2 pairs of ducks, male and female, one at each end of the garden. We thought there were only 2 of them, George and Mildred, but there seemed to be, well, I know for sure there are 2 pairs, and they interchange from time to time. They waddle up and down the garden. And we've got a pair of pheasants as well.
Wow.
An absolutely extraordinary, you know, male pheasant who is parading around, and the female pheasant who's nesting in the back of the hedges rather sort of secretively, and she sort of pops out from time to time, and he's making sure the cats keep away. So this is very exciting.
Are these accidental acquisitions, Peter, or were they chosen? They just turned up.
They've just arrived to
lovely.
Spend the time with us. We have a sort of wild garden bit at the end, which the birds do really like, but no, completely unexpected. I mean, I guess this is what happens when you live in a new house and the seasons change. Different things happen at different times of the year. So we've lost the hedgehogs and we've gained pheasants.
Oh, and ducks. Oh, how lovely. I love ducks. They're so funny. The way they walk just always makes me chortle.
But my new favourite animal, which appears on my hat, of course, is the sloth. So I've had a really interesting 2 weeks away. Feel like I need a holiday after it, though. Most people think I've been on a holiday. Yeah, so it was very interesting. I went to speak at a conference for all the head teachers, safeguarding leads and health and safety leads in all the Nord Anglia education schools across the Americas, North, South and Central America. There's 27 schools. So all in all, probably about 200 people, and I'm a sort of walking exemplification of why safeguarding and happy, healthy cultures are a big, important theme for them to be talking about and thinking about together. And my role was to kind of be present and encourage the conversations. And then at the end, I was the sort of keynote closing address, though it was one of these kind of fireside conversation chat things in front of lots of people. And then having done that, we had a weekend in Panama to explore the rainforest, and there's something absolutely extraordinary about going on one of these little motorboats onto the Panama Canal, and on one side you've got these huge great ships with 5,000 containers on them, absolutely massive, and then on the other side of you you've got wild monkeys sort of eating berries off the front of your boat. It was incredible. So that was week 1, and then week 2 I visited 4 or 5 schools in the US, which again was really interesting, and just had conversations about cultures in and around schools. And although these schools are all from the same group, they have very different characteristics and vibes. And yeah, it was great. And I've come back with all sorts of thoughts and ideas and issues to take further, and a whole load of US college merch of one kind or another. So you'll probably see me in different sweatshirts and hats and coffee mugs and in the coming period. But there we are. That was my 2 weeks, and now I just feel I need a lie down. I'm still a bit jet lagged.
So you were over there, Peter, you know, at the risk of going more globally political, when the attacks on Iran.
Yeah.
started. Yeah. And so how did that go down?
Well, for quite a lot of the time, I guess I was in a bubble and I was so busy. We weren't really watching the news, and in some ways it was much more of an issue for the group schools in UAE. And huge, great, issues and challenges about what to do to make sure that the children and young people and the staff and all of that was safe. So by the time we got to the States, again, it's difficult to generalize. I mean, I tried really not to talk about politics. There's definitely a sort of sense that there's a sort of conventional wisdom about what's happening to the US economy and what Donald Trump isn't doing, that is quite straightforwardly rejected by other people over there. But at the same time, this kind of adventure is deeply unpopular with the vast majority of the people over there. So it's a bit of a gamble in many senses, I would suggest. There was one moment where we had some free tokens for a happy hour at one of the hotels, which we didn't use, and we left behind with a couple of people who looked like they would be deserving of a beer or two. And when they heard our accents and that we were from the UK, they got very cross with us, despite us giving away our beer tokens for being yellow-bellied. What's going on in your country? Why aren't you in there bombing Iran?
Oh my God.
Yeah, okay, let's not discuss this here. Enjoy your beer and your beachside view.
Yeah, blimey. Anyway, let's not talk about those things, Peter, although it was entirely my fault because I asked.
That's okay. What about you? You were off up to make a speech yesterday, and I think talking about to me on the WhatsApp about things you've been reading of late, and what about? I think you said you'd been looking at Doughnut Economics.
I had actually, and it's one of those things where I sort of think, this is going to sound terrible, but it's true, that things I've been saying for ages were written down in this book. You know what I mean? I'm like, that's exactly what I thought. I should have written the bloody book.
I felt that about your book. It's a battle on the board.
Did you? I got in before you. But because one of the things I've always really bugged me about our sector is how often success is measured by size and growth. Big reserves, big income, massive organisation, lots of staff, lots of volunteers. And how often I've sat in on board meetings in some charities where the board have been urging growth. Let's grow our income, let's grow over. And I've often thought, I've often asked actually, for what? And of course, always thing is, if we have more money, we can help more people. But that's just a wishy-washy. It was never really properly thought through. It was just, and they would say things like, we had the biggest, increase in income compared to any other charity in our sector, or whatever. And it always used to just make my teeth ache, because I've always been of the view that success as a charity has got absolutely sod all to do with size, nothing. That success as a charity is, are you doing what it says on the tin? In other words, are you delivering against your charitable objects with the resources that you've got? And of course, that's not to say sometimes aiming for growth, might not be. You might think that actually, we've got such a successful model here in Kent. Let's see if we could, stretch it over into Essex, for example. So I can absolutely understand that, whether it's for purpose, but it's just this whole, and actually it's very much I might be being unfair, but I think it's a very male paradigm, this idea of growth and size, and the bigger you are, the better you are, and all the rest of it. Anyway, and I've been reading Doughnut Economics by Kate Raworth. I don't know if you read it, Peter, but it's really, she wrote it.
I know about it.
Yeah, 2018 or something.
Yeah.
But at the centre of it, she makes this same argument, which is about, growth for what? For what? Like, you cannot keep growing. There comes a point when it's just not sustainable. And she is talking about this core of the donut, or the hole in the donut, is about purpose. Like, what exactly is it you're trying to achieve? And I've always felt that. Like DSC, for example, so we haven't grown financially in years. If anything, we've shrunk, if I'm perfectly honest. We have, however, extended our reach. So our size of our income, our size of our turnover, our size of reserves hasn't really got better. But what we have got more of is more reach into the sector and more people accessing our services and coming to us for help and things like that. And it's costing us more to do, of course, ironically.
Yeah.
So I've always had this thing of, and I'm sure I've said this before, one of my favourite charities is Bulldog Rescue and Rehoming, and that's what they do. They're not looking around for a pot of money because somebody said we've got money for budgerigars, and so they're renaming themselves Bulldog and Budgerigar Rescue and Rehoming to get more money. So I think there's something about really being focused on what you can deliver. Anyway, I don't know what you thought about that. And what you think about the notion of Doughnut Economics.
Well, so when I started at the NSPCC, I think NSPCC's overall income was probably about 140 million a year. And when I left, it was probably about 125 million. So you might feel this is rather self-serving to agree 100% with you, because I didn't double the income of the organisation. Fair play to people who can increase the impact and massively increase the income. And there have definitely been moments in the NSPCC's life when that happened, and different people have different views why. I think there was a massive expansion of the NSPCC because they got very early into direct debits, and lots of people signed up when they were very cheap to get people to give £2, £3, £4, £5 a month, and there wasn't so much kind of competition, and media wasn't so fragmented. But I feel kind of confident and happy to tell quite a proud story that I think during my period there, if you looked at the difference we made directly and indirectly for children, there's a strong growth of impact story to tell there in a mix of what you do, what you enable, and what you influence. And secondly, I also think, and this is my kind of treasury background coming out, but I think that donors could be much more confident that when they gave money to the NSPCC, a much more significant proportion of it was going on actively making a difference to specified objectives. So I'm kind of with you 100% that it's impact that matters, and the sector press is dreadful at this sort of reporting the annual reports and accounts, and however hard I think we and others tried to describe the difference which we were making and what happened in one year or another, the only headline you get is Oxfam's income is up or down by this, RSPCA's is up or down by that, which, as you say, doesn't tell you a lot, does it?
Because they never say, they reached 50,000 children across 17 different countries. You're absolutely right about that. It's as well, not as a nation, as a world, we're obsessed with money, and money is a measure of success. And I'm really noted the fact that you said impact there, of course, because there's, quite a bit of discussion going on at the moment, which you may not have picked up, about the government's, Office of the Impact Economy, and the various definitions. And our trustee, Andrew Perkis, who is just brilliant, we absolutely love him. He used to be a charity commissioner actually years ago, and he's been involved in the sector for decades. But anyway, he wrote this very, I would say, possibly excoriating piece about the use of the term impact economy. And what does it actually mean? What does it actually cover? And if you look at it, there are very loose definitions. There are things left out of the definition. So I think, for example, they've left out trade unions, for example, have been left out of the impact economy. And I'm not sure what the situation is, particularly with charities, but, he's saying it's really confusing and it's unhelpful. And this is not the way to go. What we need is, call a spade and be clear what we're talking about. And he's also making the point there are all sorts of tiny businesses who are making an impact. Does that include, in other words, impact economy applies to absolutely every activity in private sector, public sector. So how is it helpful? So I was just very interested about how we use the term impact. We tend in the sector to use it quite casually, as if everybody has the same interpretation of what it actually means. Anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, I like it. I like it as a term because I think the difference that you're making directly and indirectly to your charitable purpose is the impact that you're having. And how you measure it is a bit more complicated than the number of people a lot more complicated than the number of people you employ or the amount of money you generate, or in a private sector case, the it's more straightforward. You make a profit or you don't make a profit. You kind of, in some businesses, you grow or you die. You're taken over by someone else. So I did like the slightly more sophisticated kind of Doughnut Economics sort of sense that the difference you're making should be the space between, in aggregate at least, making sure that everyone gets their basic needs
met
in the middle, and that we don't erode the environment beyond. And so the donut is that space between everyone being provided for and the resources of the globe not being depleted. So I think that's pretty neat, and it makes for a good diagram. I don't totally accept it in the sense that I think what do you apply it to? Do you apply it to every organization? Do you apply it to every nation? Do you apply it in aggregate? If you apply it in aggregate to the world, then some of us should be doing more than others in order to equalize the impact. And I also question whether the donut is a finite size, and there aren't things which we can do with technological development and growth and advancement. This may be a bit too capitalist for you, but that it's possible, in Liz Truss's words, to grow the cake. That if you do the right things in the right order, it's possible that you might be able to push the boundaries of the space within which we exist. But that aside, it's I think it makes for a provocative conversation, and definitely to be fixated on GDP and to forget about happiness and well-being is just as much a mistake as hothousing loads and loads of kids to get absolutely brilliant exam passes, and have them all leaving school being miserable with loans of £80,000 to have to pay back.
Yeah, that's very true. I think she does in the book say that it can be applied at any level. You can look at it organisationally, globally, or nationally, or however it is you want to look at it. But there is something, this thing about growing the cake. It's the consequences of it. That's the thing, and it's also why grow the cake. So it's my point about bulldog rescue rehoming. If your size of your cake, so if your country, everybody's provided for at a basic level, and so people aren't falling off the edges, and that you're being responsible around the environment, why do you need to grow? Why do you need to have more money coming in if you've got sufficient resources to do what you need to do within your space? And I think a lot of it is, and you can forgive me for this, Peter, and Jose, who's listening, obviously, is that a lot of it is to do with men in charge. It's about, we've got to be bigger, we've got to be the top, we've got to be better than everybody else. And we see extreme examples of this, of course, in the cases of people like Putin and Trump.
Yes.
But there is this kind of notion that, it's size, it's bigger, it's better, it's stronger, I'm the winner, etc. And I just think we need to turn that on its head, especially in charities. We don't need to be the biggest. And how many charities say, we're the best fundraiser for whatever the particular cause is. It's like, you don't need to do any of that shit. It's, really just do what you do and do it well and be proud of that. So I do think there's a little bit of a male paradigm, a bit of a sort of, back to the patriarchy about we've got to be bigger, and if we're bigger, we're better.
We don't need to be the biggest in our own institutions and organizations, but we do want to be ambitious for our people in aggregate. And if we satisfied ourselves with providing a basic level of support and survival for each human being on the planet and settled for what that looked like in 1750 or the dark ages, then our lives would be nothing like as fulfilling as they are today. Now, the conundrum...
We weren't doing that, Peter. We weren't doing that, though. It was, the poor people... In fact, the world has got better. So listeners, if you've never come across Gapminder.com, it's a fabulous, fabulous source of data about changes in the world, and it's about poverty and about health and about well-being and all that stuff. And they track this, how the world maps out against health and wealth over time, and you see all these countries moving up and down, but the trend is generally in the right direction. So there's no doubt that the world is better, but it still isn't good enough. But the part of the problem is this drive for growth and wealth, and that creates this massive gap, doesn't it, between those who have and those who have not. If those people who are striving for wealth strove for everybody to be safe and to have enough food to eat and have whatever, then what would happen is we would have more people thriving. We wouldn't have individuals earning billions of pounds. We'd have lots of people earning thousands of pounds, spending their money safely and all the rest of it. That's the point I'm making. It's, anyway.
The polarization of income and wealth and the aggregation of extraordinarily obscene sums of money to a tiny number of people cannot be right.
No.
But interestingly, one of the things which another of the keynote speakers said at the conference that I closed, and I have to be a bit careful because she was very good and she was really inspiring and engaging and got people feeling sort of positive. But she had this phrase: healthy organizations grow, growing organizations change. So her shtick was all about how do you create healthy organizations, because if you get the conditions right and everyone working really kind of productively and effectively and at their full potential, then as a consequence you're going to grow. Now, how we define growth, if we define growth as you and I want to do it, by the difference we're making to our purpose, then that is good. And then she said, and as a consequence, they change. And I thought that there is something in that. But just looking out at my garden as I've come back, healthy things do grow, but also unhealthy things grow at twice the speed. So there are kind of weeds and negative.
Some healthy things don't grow. So, for example, I have documented evidence to say that DSC has a very healthy, happy workforce. People who enjoy their work, they're passionate about it, and they do it incredibly well. And we haven't grown.
No, but you've grown your influence and your reach.
Yes,
it depends on how you define the terms.
That's not what but we're not talking about that, are you? Because we also talk about growing people's health and happiness is just as, so I just think we've got to really, really test this word growth, or stop talking about it and talk about what we're actually genuinely trying to achieve whenever we say, rather than growth. But actually talking of small things, of everybody being happy. I don't know if you read about the closure, or not the closure, but the small charities team in NCVO have been, I think they're restructuring, and so they've been made redundant. And what's interesting about it is there's been a bit of outrage about it. But as you know, I co-founded, along with a chap called Patrick Cox, the Small Charities Coalition, and I was its first chair for about 7 years. And the one thing that was very noticeable, it was incredibly hard to pay for it, because small charities, by their very nature, just did not have the money to pay membership. They had very limited funds in order to pay to go on programs and things like that. And funders just didn't want to fund it. I mean, we did have some good funders, though. The Tudor Trust, who will forever be a hero fundraiser, heroine fundraiser for me, were absolutely fantastic. And then, of course, what happened was it then changed slightly. It did sort of different things. But it still struggled to raise money. It still struggled to get people to fund it. So I find it really, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I suspect that what NCVO found was that it just wasn't viable, that it's, and I think then, NCVO, like the rest of us, are struggling to balance the books at the moment. So I expect that was the motivation behind it. But it's the kind of hypocrisy people who say how important small charities are, and they're real sort of underscoring of the sector, which they are, and then don't give them any sodding money.
If
any funder dares to comment on how important small charities are and cannot prove to me that they blooming fund, I'm coming after them. And because it's the same with infrastructure. People always say how important infrastructure is, and then they won't fund us. It's so difficult. So it just comes back to that, the whole thing about small matters and small is good.
Yeah, one of the best partnerships that we had in my time at NSPCC, I inherited it. It was nothing to do with me in setting it up, and I tried to keep it going, was with Children England on helping small charities with safeguarding, because there are these increasing there's the increasing obligations and responsibilities that small charities have, and lots of kind of goodwill and desire to do the right thing, but again couldn't particularly pay for it. So for a while the DFE supported this strategic partnership between the two organisations, and we did the kind of thinking in the programmes, and Kathy and Children England had the reach out into the sector, and it worked very well, but it wasn't an economically viable concern, and we were unable to fundraise specifically for it. When the DFE pulled out, we tried to keep it going for a little while, and it became increasingly niche, and the people who knew about it cared about it, and there were some amazing examples of, I can remember, brass band charities in Yorkshire gaining so much. It's a function of what you put in is what you get out. But so many others just didn't have whatever to put in. So it went exactly the same way, it sounds, as what must be happening at NCVO. So difficult.
So difficult, and it's easy. I know people are hurling bats at NCVO, and there are things that NCVO do that I think, bats deserve to be chucked. But I think in this instance is that, we know that small charities don't have a lot of money, and anybody serving small charities, it's very difficult to get some form of, payment so you can live basically for your services to small charities. So, but it's and yet we need them. And we do need them because they do incredibly important work, and they're sort of part of the network. They're the 1,000 flowers blooming, aren't they? They're part of the network of what makes our society strong.
What is the definition of a small charity? What do you think of when you talk about small charities?
Well, I don't count. So micro charities are the about 110,000 charities that have less than £10,000 a year turnover. So I don't think of them as small charities. No. They're micro charities, and they have no staff. They have very little money. It's all done by volunteers. Very important, by the way. They do fantastic stuff, very local, very community oriented in the thing. So I would tend to think of a small charity as being anything under about £1,750,000 a year. Okay. So anything between about, I would say between. So by the time you can afford to employ a person, right, I think that's when you become a small charity. So it can be as much as 50,000 a year up to sort of slightly under £1 million. That would be my personal definition. Others have slightly different definitions. Yeah. Whereas anything over £1 million, I'd say is more medium. Although, because even those of us, I mean, our turnover is about 1.6, 1.7, something like that. We would be classed as a big charity because the sector is so big. We're sort of, well, not big, right. Class, but we don't think of ourselves that way at all. We think of ourselves as being really small and struggling,
At Five Rights Foundation, we're just over 2 million, and it feels small, obviously compared with where it was before, but again, quite large in relation to lots of the sorts of organisations that you're describing.
So but then having said that, it's gutting for the small charities that don't get the help that they need, but there are plenty of people wanting to help, and there are other resources. I mean, we have loads of resources for small charities. Our speed read collection, for example, which are those really short books which you've reviewed and been a peer reviewer on. I mean, they're fantastically good value. They cost hardly anything, really, and they give you some basic tips and things to do. We provide resources that absolutely don't break the bank, and then loads of free resources, and there are loads of those around, I think, as well. It's just that the problem is it's the voice of small charities that gets lost. It's not even the services, because people will help. We'll step up and help. NCVO will still do what it can. CVSs will do what they can, because obviously they're very connected to small local charities. So it isn't really about the access to support. It's about you lose the voice. It's a bit the same when Volunteering England merged with NCVO. This is what happens with mergers, is that you lose the voice and the credibility when you merge into a different organisation. And no matter how much people commit to saying, we will absolutely, keep the banner flying for volunteering, it gets lost. Of course it does, because, there's no blame in it. And so, and in fact, when I was at the Small Charities Coalition, we merged with charity trustee networks, because they couldn't, as a small charity, afford to function. So we merged with the Small Charities Coalition, and we absolutely promised we will put trustees right at the heart of everything. And of course, what happened was we ended up, desperately trying to fundraise for small charities, and we couldn't get funding, as you say, for the trustee bit. We could only get a bit for the small, and so in the end, they didn't become as much of a focus as we promised. So for me, the biggest loss about small charities is the voice of small charities, the representative voice of small, which is why Patrick and I set up the Small Charities Coalition in the first place, But having said that, Peter, somebody will start a new version of a small charity, because that's what happens in our sector. Somebody will say, right, we're going to start a new charity, and we're going to call it, Little Charities Collaborative or something. They'll find a way of, they could probably still use the name, I don't know.
and it'll be new and distinctive and innovative, so it'll attract some funding for a short period of time until everyone gets bored,
and then it'll disappear again, because that's kind of the nature of it. So, and small charities are very resilient, bless them. They have to be, because it is so tough. But so it's the voice, I think, is more important, and we'll do what we can to fill the hole in the meantime at DSC. But
good for you. So the final thing I just thought I might mention, and I've not done very much since coming back apart from fail to sleep, was I've watched 2/3 of the Channel 4 programme Dirty Business.
Oh, okay.
Which I think has had quite a lot of coverage in the press and has been described as the next Mr. Bates versus the post office, and this kind of corporate scandal of the water companies polluting our water with devastating consequences on a business model that is all too familiar to those of us who've been battling away against the tech companies for far too long. But it reminded me of the very first essay that I was set when I went to university and to do and in my British government and politics course. And the title, I can remember it even now, the title was Parliament, this is 1983.
Yeah.
Parliament is rightly in decline. In a democracy, the functions of representation and debate are better played by pressure groups and the media. and I of course, I was young, naive student, absolutely believed in Parliament and democracy, and these people are voted in and all the rest of it. And now I sort of look back and think, what has changed? Because I feel that this television programme will have, as
more
a consequence,
impact.
Media coverage have far more impact than these people who've been battling away for justice for their dead children and their polluted rivers and biodiversity and all the rest of it. Then anyway, one to come back to perhaps at some point.
Well, it's also, because the government's rationale for not renationalising the water companies is that it cost them too much. But you know what? It wouldn't. There are loads of ways. Yeah, because they'd have to buy the shares. That's what they're saying. So they'd have to buy the shares and carry the debt.
Well, so much money's been taken out of the companies. It's not there anymore. It's
exactly,
with these people you described earlier who made super profits on the back of everything else. So I reckon that's just an excuse. There is absolutely a way they could handle this and bring it back into, And the reality, you get lots of commentators saying, nationalised water companies wouldn't necessarily be better than private ones. Well, that's possibly true, but at least somebody wouldn't be making a shed load of money and prancing around in a yacht off the south coast of France off the back of our water. And the other thing is that the trouble is, a private sector company, you cannot hold it to account. You just can't. It's slippery. You as the only thing you can do, and especially with these ones which are monopolies, you can't even refuse to use their services, because where the hell else are Jose and I going to get our water from? Well, so I think the benefit of certainly utilities being run by the government, at least you can sack your MP, or you can oust your Prime Minister, or you can find a different way to hold people to account. So anyway, we've run out of time. We should talk about this another time, Peter. Yes, because I still believe in regulation. But anyway.
No, so do I. Oh, no, I absolutely do. But it's not enough for utilities as well.
All right.
Anyway, it's really hard not to keep going.
Yes, we better stop and have a great week. Love to Arthur.
Yeah.
And by the time we're next together, we will have names for the pheasants.
Oh, and the ducks.
Well, the ducks, one pair of ducks is George and Mildred.
That's right.
But now we've got two, we need two other names. So all suggestions greatly received. Yeah.
Some of our listeners will not know the George and Mildred reference. So hopefully someone will message us and say, I know who George and Mildred were. Okay, bye,
Very
listeners.
Good. See you. Thanks. Bye.